Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Turning Readers into Writers. And this week it is part 2 of our mini-series about your writing process. This week we're going to be looking at steps 3, 4, 5 and 6 and even step 7 about that middle section when you're doing the edits and trying to make your book as good as it can be. So let's find out what they are. Welcome to the Turning Readers into Writers podcast, where I teach beginner writers how to find the time and confidence to write their first novel. I'm your host, Emma Desi, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you for joining me today, because if you've been longing to write your novel for forever, this is the place to be. Hello and welcome back to Turning Readers into Writers. And today we are still looking at the writing process, but we're moving on to part 2 of this little mini-series. So last week we began taking a look at my writing process, but that's as a means for you to examine how other people write and take from it what might suit your writing life. I said this last week and I'll reiterate it just to be sure. It's not prescriptive at all. It's really just aimed at offering some inspiration, because when I started writing, I looked at other authors, published authors, and really wanted to know how they wrote, what their creative process was like. And from that, I took a lot of comfort and a lot of strength, and just kind of knowing I was part of a group of writers and not on my own trying to figure it all out. So your writing process, it will evolve over time, and you're going to try out some new things, some of which won't work and you'll discard them, but then you'll try something new and you'll find it does work for you, and so you'll keep that as part of your writing process. And the writing process or the creative process, it's not just about how you sit down at your desk and write, but it's about how you approach the entire process, from coming up with your story idea, committing that story idea to paper, then refining it and improving it until at last, you've got a draft that you're happy with. It may not be perfect. Is a draft ever perfect? But it's one that you're going to be happy with, and that you're going to be proud of to take to the next level. So once you are at that stage, you're going to have a decision to make. So are you going to start querying agents? You want to go down the traditional route? You want to see your book in the bookshop? Or are you going to make the decision to self-publish? So last week we looked at step 1, which is the importance of mulling over your story idea, determining whether or not it's got any legs. Is it a story that you can live with for the next year? And if it is, then we talked about brainstorming the idea, jotting down some notes, or even plotting your novel, depending on whether you are a discovery or a plotter, a discovery writer or a plotter. Then step 2 was to actually write it, and we looked a little bit at how and where you write and the goals that you might set yourself for each session. But this week we're going to move on to step 3. And this is the step where I transcribe onto a computer. So I mentioned last week that I tend to handwrite. I don't write straight onto the computer. And I used to, I'd say sort of over a year ago now, I used to hand type my handwritten notes into the computer. So I would read, I guess it'd be like being like a secretary for myself. I would type up the notes that I'd written. And this would take a long time, which was kind of okay. But then I discovered this piece of software called Dragon Anywhere, and I will put a link to that in the show notes so you can go and have a look at it and see if it's of interest to you. But it is dictation software, so rather than typing out what I've handwritten, I can dictate it and then save that dictated file onto my computer. I cannot tell you what a lifesaver this has been. So not only has it saved my body from the rigor of all that typing, but it saves me a lot of time, because what might have taken me, I don't know, up to an hour to transcribe, onto the computer by hand, I can now do it in sort of 15 minutes or so. So if you do write by hand yourself and then you transcribe, I really, really recommend trying out Dragon. And as I say, I'll link to that. It does take a little bit of getting used to because the software needs to acclimatize to your voice, your accent, your speech patterns. But once it's up and running, it's amazing. It's amazing. So step 3. Whether or not you are transcribing from handwritten notes or onto the computer, or whether you've already written it on the computer and you're going back to the beginning, this is where you will do essentially a second edit. So it's one of the things I like about handwriting, then transcribing. As I'm dictating into the machine, I can also do a little bit of editing as well. So I can smarten things up, I can change names if I need to, or I can maybe take out paragraphs that just don't fit anymore, and because something else has occurred further down the line and it renders that particular bit of text obsolete. So I can do that quite quickly and easily when dictating. But for you, if you've already got it on the computer, that might simply mean going back to the beginning and you start reading it over, because now you're looking to read it as a whole chunk, as a whole story, not in bits. So you're now not reading it in chapters or in scenes or out of order even. You're reading it from start to finish. You've got your whole draft here. So you're going to read it from start to finish and try to get a feel for the flow of the book, for the structure of the book, and for your characters as well. This can be quite in-depth edit depending on how you're feeling about it, or if you're needing a little bit longer for the story to settle into your body and into your mind. But this is when so I've done those small bits of editing, and then this is when I move on to step 4. And step 4 is a kind of proper self-edit. I go through the book much more carefully now. I might even be reading aloud what it is I've written, so I can try and catch not just typos, but really try and put that story into better order again. This might be when I rewrite paragraphs, I might improve the dialogue, I may even be adding new scenes where necessary. And so it's a second chance for me, maybe a first chance for you, to look at the structure as a whole. Does the story flow well? Is the tension building sufficiently? How are my characters shaping up? Have I put them through enough trauma? Always trying to put my characters into tricky situations. Because I write my first draft so quickly, this is the stage I need to really delve into. And I'll go back and repeat this stage quite a few times. So I may do a timeline check, for example, or a name check. So invariably I will change the name of one of my characters. I don't know why, they never seem to settle. I'm always changing them. Or I might even amalgamate two people because they're serving the same purpose in the book. I've had to do that on a couple of occasions now. I might go over the character's timeline. So all my stories to date have been set in the present day. So I need to ensure that everything, when they were a certain age, what year was that? Does that fit in with any reference to music I'm making? Or can they drive a car yet? And I've said that they're driving. Well, actually, are they able to at that age? So I've just got to make sure I've got my timeline in the right order. I will also look at things like the weather and the seasons. So, are there leaves on the trees? Is the wind cold? Is it an autumn wind? Is there snow on the ground? Depending on the season, what clothes are they wearing? If it's summer here in Scotland, we have daylight up until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. But then is it winter, in which case the sun has set by 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon? So those are things to think about. I also do a 5 senses check. So we know generally what the character is seeing, but we also want to think about what smells there might be. What do they touch? How tactile are things? What is your character listening to? Is there any background noise that would place them? And what tastes are there? Can they taste something in the air, or are they having a lovely meal? And how does the food taste? Does it add to the sensuousness of the scene that you are writing? It's not just about what they're seeing with their eyes. This is a really, really powerful edit to do, and it can add some fantastic layers to your story. So I do recommend that you do that one. Again, as part of this step, I'm going back and I'm looking for spelling mistakes and typos. If you've been following me for any length of time on my written work, you'll probably catch typos all over the place. I do not have an eye for detail, and I'm generally a terrible, terrible speller. So on every round of edits I do, I'm always picking stuff up. I'm always picking up typos and errors, all the while acknowledging that there will be many more that I have missed. But I want to take this moment to kind of give you a reminder in case you are like me and grammar, spelling, etc. They're not what you're best at. I want to remind you, as I remind myself regularly, those things are not my superpower. My superpower is storytelling. Your superpower is storytelling. And that's why later on down the road, you're going to ask other people to do those checks for you, whether it be your editor, your proofreader, or in my case, my mum, or even when you get to the stage of having your beta readers. Those are the people who are invaluable, and they will pick up so many things that you just cannot see because you're so close to the story. It's really, really difficult to pick them up. So as I say, I do return to these edits again and again throughout of all the steps that I do. I urge you to do the same. And as I say, those typos will get picked up by my editor or the proofreader at later stages as well. They'll be able to pick up things like, if you did get the season wrong or something doesn't fit into the timeline. Again, these are things that your editors and proofreaders, or your mum in my case, will be able to pick up. Your manuscript is always a work in progress. I think you'd be hard pressed to find an author who felt that their manuscript was ever perfect. To us, the reader, it might seem perfect and we want to write just like them, but I would be amazed if the writer themselves thought it was perfect. I bet they look back over their old work and think, oh, I should have done this differently. I should have added that in, or I should have taken this out. So just remember, your work is always a work in progress. So let's move on to step 5. For me, this is when the book goes to the editor for a structural or a developmental edit. And so this is when the editor is looking at the whole arc of the story, a big picture edit. And this is both an exciting and a slightly terrifying experience. It's terrifying because I know my editor is going to come back with lots of improvements, lots of things that need to be tightened up and made better. And, after all, that's what I'm paying for. I want her to do that. But it is also an exciting part of the process because I know it's going to make the book so, so much better. And it's wonderful. And I love the fact that she can see all these structural gaps in the story that I would never, never have picked up on. So she has the book for maybe 6 to 8 weeks. And I sit at home with bated breath. And then she sends it back. And then that's stage 6 for me. So stage 6 is where I go through all of her notes. I read her notes, try and understand what it is that she is suggesting to me. Let that sink in, let it digest for a while, and then I need to go ahead and take action on those notes. And I'm happy to do so, even though they can be quite daunting at times. I'm very happy to do so because, as I said, I know it's going to make the novel better. So to date, these changes, the step 6 changes, they've taken anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks. Obviously it depends on the comments and how big the changes are, but I have to admit for this latest one, there's quite a lot of structural changes to make. I think I might be rejigging the whole thing, so that probably is going to take me far longer than the 2 to 4 weeks, and I'm thinking I might even have to step away from the book for a little bit longer before coming back to it and tackling those changes. Now, it may make everything fall into place and it'll be a really painless process, or it might be really hard and make everything just that little bit more difficult. So time will tell. I just want to do a little sidestep here and say that for me, this becomes a bit of a decision time, and it might be for you as well. But as an independent author, I've got a few financial factors to consider at this point. So in an ideal world, and if my budget allows, I will send my book off for a second round of edits. And this will pull the book into the best shape that I can make it, and is definitely my first choice. However, I have to be realistic. My budget doesn't always allow, but I do try to make sure I've set some money aside for that. If I don't have the budget, then I have to make sure that I read the manuscript a few more times, 2, 3, maybe even 4 more times before I send it out to a proofreader. And the proofreader, again, is if budget allows. So that's quite a serious consideration I have to make as somebody who is, wanting to make a career out of being a full-time writer. But let's move on to step 7. So this is the step for me that if my budget allows, it goes on to have the second round with the editor, and I make the necessary revisions. These revisions are usually, to date, have been less demanding than the structural edit. In my experience so far, it's focused more on the character development and adding in extra details or some minor scenes that will just help round out a plot line. So once I've done that, once I've made those changes after the second round of edits, I move on to step 8. It's actually quite a lot of steps, isn't there? And this is when, again, budget allowing, the book goes to the proofreader. And as I sort of mentioned before, it doesn't matter how many times I read through this. I'm amazed at how many mistakes and typos a good proofreader will pick up. The mistakes that me, perhaps my editor, and even my mum, because all my books go to my mum for a read through, that we've all missed them out. So when you're starting out, the second edit with the editor and the proofread may just be absolutely undoable for you, and that's kind of okay. When you start to earn a bit of money from your books, then you can always come back to the manuscript and work on it a bit more. Especially if you can put your work, if you're an independent author, if you're a self-publisher, you can put your book out into the world and then come back to it very easily, make some adjustments to it, tighten it up, do what you need to do, and just press publish again. If you are going the traditional route and you're sending your book out, but you've not yet been picked up, then again, you've still got that freedom 6 months, a year down the line to come back to the book and work on it again, always improving. Remember, as I said, no matter what stage you're at, your manuscript is a work in progress. But I've got a strong recommendation for you, and it is that I urge you not to skip step 5, which is to go with that structural or developmental edit. If you have to save up, do so. Hire someone to give you that big picture edit, because it will be absolutely invaluable, not just for this manuscript, but all future ones as well. I haven't learned as much as I have learned from my editor. With every edit my book goes through, I learn another valuable lesson, whether it be about structure or character development. And I've heard other writers say this as well, that it's because it's focus solely on your book rather than being part of a class, rather than it being a bit of feedback on a small piece that you've written. This is your whole book, your whole novel. You're getting all this advice about how to make your book better. And if your editor is as good as mine, not only will the advice be specific to the manuscript you've got, but it's advice that you'll take forward to every future manuscript you write as well. They are craft lessons as much as anything. So that would be my strong recommendation. If you have to save up for the money to hire a big picture edit, please do so. It is absolutely invaluable and one you don't want to miss. You will recoup the benefits further on down the line. So that's we've come to the end of part 2. Next week we're going to go to part 3, and that'll be the end of this little mini series. But I'll take you through the process again, right through to publication, so you can see how it works for me. So if you've missed it, don't forget to go to part 1 and see how the story idea starts and why it's important for you to evolve your own creative or writing process. And if you get a chance to hop on over to the blog, you can hop on over there and read it as well. All right, well, thank you very much for your time today. I hope you found this kind of middle section just as interesting as the first, and understand why it's just as valuable as the first section. Making the story better is equally as important as getting the story down in the first place. But I will speak to you next time. All right, take care. Bye-bye. Well, that's it for this week. I hope you found it useful. If you're interested in becoming a part of a safe and friendly community of like-minded writers who want to write their first novel, go to my Facebook group at emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers. I can't wait to see you in there. You can find the show notes for this episode and all the others at emmadesi.com/podcast. Thanks again for joining me, and I can't wait to get to know you better soon.